Chapter 1. The Last Hope. The cold vacuum of space stretched infinitely beyond the ship's observation deck, a vast, unfathomable sea of stars that twinkled like the scattered remains of a once glorious empire. Karaza stood alone, her silhouette framed by the translucent walls of the vessel, her eyes scanning the stars, searching for anything that might give her purpose. Her ship, the Varnies, was a relic, a symbol of Savorii pride and power, now adrift in the vastness of space, abandoned and hollow. Once, the Varnies had been a ship feared across galaxies, its weapons unparalleled, its warriors undefeated in the trials of combat. But that was before the war. The Savorii had once been the strongest species in the galaxy, a race of conquerors and scholars, with an empire that stretched across countless star systems, each world falling under their banner with barely a fight. But now, as she looked at the stars that had once been the territories of her people, she could only feel the weight of isolation and loss. Karaza was the last of her kind. The war had begun as all great wars did, with a spark, a misunderstanding, an escalation. And yet, for all the intelligence her people possessed, the Savorii had not foreseen the ferocity of their enemies. It had started with the Hylian Federation, a collective of species so vast that even the Savorei's warships could not compete against the sheer numbers they commanded. At first, the Federation had sent diplomats, their voices soft, promising peace and trade. Karaza remembered the first of those meetings clearly, the arrogance in their eyes, the way they had treated the Savorii as if they were mere barbarians. And the worst part of it? They had been right. The Savorii, in their arrogance, had assumed that their superior technology, their unmatched warriors, would make them invincible. But they hadn't been. The war had dragged on, millions of lives lost in space battles, on ravaged planets, in skirmishes that bled her people dry, until one day, the Federation launched its final strike, a cataclysmic wave of destruction that obliterated every Savorii homeworld in a series of devastating bombs. There had been no warning, no mercy, and when the dust had settled, only Karaza remained. She was left alone, surrounded by the corpses of her ancestors, on a ship that no longer had a purpose, alone with the wreckage of a once proud race. Her ship's engines hummed softly, a sound she had grown accustomed to, though it now seemed like a cruel mockery of the power that had once reverberated through the veins of her people. The Varnies had once been a battleship, its hull forged from alloys stronger than any known to the galaxy, its engines capable of faster-than-light travel across unimaginable distances. But now, it felt like an empty tomb, a lifeless shell that carried only the ghost of her memories. The Savorii had been a people who prided themselves on their strength, their combat prowess, and their ability to adapt. But there had been no adapting this time. There had been no second chance. Karaza's hand rested on the console in front of her, her fingers tracing the controls absent-mindedly, as she considered the unthinkable longevity. Her body, though still youthful in appearance, bore the scars of the years that had passed. The Savorii were a long-lived species, their lifespans stretching well beyond those of most other races. But that fact seemed meaningless now. Her species was dead, her bloodline extinguished, and the galaxy had moved on without her. She was the last of her kind, a survivor in a galaxy that no longer had a place for her. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to move forward. She had tried to contact any surviving Savorii ships, tried to find refuge in the worlds that had once been part of the Empire. But no answers came. The Federation had destroyed everything. No other Savorii had survived. There were no distant cousins, no uncontacted survivors hiding on forgotten worlds. She had been cast out, lost in a galaxy that had no room for her anymore. And so she had spent the last several years alone, drifting from system to system, planet to planet, seeking solace in the remnants of her past. She had once been a warrior, a leader, someone who had inspired the Savorii to greatness. But now, in the silence of her ship, she felt like nothing more than a fading dream, a whisper lost in time. Karaza closed her eyes for a moment, trying to push away the crushing wave of loneliness that threatened to overwhelm her. She had survived because that was what Savorii did. They survived, they fought, they adapted. But the weight of being the last of her species was unbearable. Her mind wandered, seeking refuge in memories of the past, memories of battles fought on distant planets, of the loud cheers of her people, of the sense of unity and purpose that had once defined their existence. But those memories, once so vivid, were beginning to fade. She could no longer remember the faces of those she had fought beside, nor the names of the places where they had made their stand. All that was left was the cold, empty void of space and the haunting silence of a galaxy that no longer cared. The stars outside seemed to mock her, their cold light a reminder of everything she had lost. She had no purpose anymore. She had no people, no legacy. The Savorii had been a proud species, but now they were gone, and Karaza was left to watch as the universe moved forward without her. She had tried to reach out to other species, other civilizations, but every attempt had ended in rejection. The galaxy was filled with survivors, races that had learned to coexist and rebuild after the devastation of war, but none of them wanted anything to do with the last Savorii. They were afraid of her, afraid of the power that she represented. And who could blame them? The Savorii had been conquerors, their legacy built on domination and strength. Now, Karaza was the embodiment of their downfall, the last reminder of a species that had once ruled the stars. She had no place in a galaxy that had learned to move on without her. But then, one day, something unexpected happened. A signal and encrypted transmission came through her ship's communications array. At first, she dismissed it as just another glitch, another relic from the past. But then, as she decoded the message, she realized that it was something different. It was a call for help, a distress signal from a planet on the edge of Federation space, a world that had been under siege by a race of hostile invaders. The message was desperate, pleading for any form of assistance. And buried in the message was a name, Earth. Earth, the cradle of humanity, a world that had once been a distant ally of the Savorii, though their relationship had been strained in recent years. The Savorii had never fully trusted humanity, but they had shared knowledge, resources, and technology in the past. Now, humanity was reaching out to her, the last Savorii, for help. For the first time in years, Karaza felt a spark of something, curiosity, perhaps, or the faintest flicker of hope. The Federation had destroyed everything, but maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth fighting for. She immediately began preparing her ship for the journey. She didn't know what awaited her on Earth, but she knew she had to answer the call. She was the last of her kind, and perhaps this was her final chance to prove that Savorii could still stand for something. But as she made her way to the coordinates, a strange thought began to creep into her mind. Perhaps she wasn't just answering a call for help. Perhaps there was more to this, something that could reignite the flame of Savorii pride. Perhaps this Earthling, this representative of humanity, could be the one who would change everything. And when she arrived on Earth, Karaza would find herself standing before a man who would change the course of her destiny forever. Karaza's fingers hovered over the control console, the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical force. For the first time in years, she felt something other than the crushing loneliness that had defined her existence since the fall of her people. The signal was faint, barely cutting through the static of space, but it was there, a cry for help. And though the message had been intended for someone else, someone from another time, another place, Karaza couldn't ignore it. The Savorii had always answered the call to battle, to defend the weak, to rise against the darkness that threatened to consume the galaxy. She had been one of the brightest warriors of her people, and though she was the last, she still carried their blood, their legacy. As her ship's engines rumbled to life, Karaza's mind raced. She had no idea what awaited her on this distant, war-torn planet. Earth, she barely knew anything about it, except that it was a human colony, a planet that had managed to avoid the devastation of the Savorii's downfall. She had heard of humanity's resilience, their ability to rebuild from ashes. But could they truly help her now? Could she trust them, or would they fear her, the last of the Savorii, the last of a race that had once been their enemy? The ship lurched forward, the stars stretching into lines as she engaged the faster-than-light drive. Karaza leaned back in her seat, her mind momentarily at peace. The hum of the engines was a comfort, a constant reminder that she was still moving, still fighting for something. For what? Exactly, she wasn't sure. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she had a goal. She was no longer wandering aimlessly through the void. She was going to Earth, to offer her help, to seek out what little remained of the hope she had lost. As the light of distant stars blurred into the fabric of space around her, Karaza thought of her people, of her ancestors, of the warriors who had forged the Savorii Empire into something powerful, something worthy of respect. But now, she carried the weight of their failure. She was the last one, the only Savorii left alive, and every moment that passed reminded her that their legacy was slipping through her fingers, eroding like sand beneath her feet. But maybe this was her chance to change that. Maybe the universe had a reason for her survival. Maybe this mission, this call for help, was the answer she had been waiting for. As the stars outside her ship bent into streaks of light, Karaza allowed herself to believe it for a fleeting moment, that perhaps there was still hope, not just for Earth, but for her, for the Savorii. And in that hope, she found a fleeting connection to a future she thought was lost forever. Chapter 2. Earth's Champion. The planet Earth appeared on the horizon, a small blue orb in the vastness of space. Karaza's eyes locked onto the coordinates she had been given, and as the ship descended through the atmosphere, she felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. The air was thick with the tension of the unknown of a world that had managed to survive despite everything. Her ship cut through the clouds, its sleek, silver exterior reflecting the light of a sun she had never known, landing in a remote part of the planet's surface, far from the bustling cities she had imagined. Her landing was silent, the ship's engines fading into the background as she powered them down. The planet's air was breathable, and her internal systems confirmed that the atmosphere contained the necessary oxygen levels for survival. She felt the weight of her ship's systems grinding to a halt, and for the first time since the fall of her people, she felt the strange sensation of standing still. The door of the ship hissed open, and the light from Earth flooded into the interior, blinding her for a moment. Karaza stepped out onto the planet's surface, her boots crunching on the soft earth below. The ground beneath her felt different than the harsh, metallic floors of her ship. This was living soil, rich with the potential for growth, a stark contrast to the dead worlds she had left behind. The landscape around her was lush, green, and alive with the sounds of birds and distant animals. It was a peaceful world, one that had managed to endure, to thrive despite the chaos of the universe. But as she surveyed the land, she knew that peace could not last forever. Earth was under threat, and that was why she had come, because someone, somewhere, had decided they needed her. But who? It didn't take long before she heard the sounds of approaching footsteps. The ground trembled lightly as a figure emerged from the trees, a human, clad in a standard combat uniform. But there was something different about him. The way he moved, with the precision of a soldier, yet the care of someone who understood the weight of the world around them. Karaza immediately assessed him, noting his build, his stance, the subtle hints of experience that marked him as more than just an average soldier. He was different, and though her instincts urged her to remain cautious, she couldn't ignore the undeniable pull that drew her attention to him. The human stopped a few paces away, his gaze meeting hers, and for a moment, there was only silence between them, an unspoken recognition that transcended the obvious differences between their species. His eyes, a deep brown, scanned her with curiosity, wariness, but also something else. Respect? No, it was more like awe. "You're Karaza, aren't you?" His voice was steady, unwavering, as if he had already known she would be here. "The last of the Savorii." Karaza tilted her head slightly. "You've heard of me?" The words felt foreign on her tongue, as though the name of her people had been forgotten by most. Earth had no reason to remember the Savorii. The man nodded, stepping closer. His name was Gabriel Blackwood, Earth's champion, as it would turn out. A title he had earned through his exploits in battles against the alien forces that had attempted to invade his world. Gabriel was a hero in the truest sense of the word, though he didn't wear that title with the arrogance or pride that most would. His reputation had spread across the galaxy, and though Karaza didn't know much about Earth's politics or its military, she had heard the whispers of Gabriel's deeds. "I know who you are," Gabriel said, his voice softer now. "I know what you've lost. The galaxy remembers. The Savorii were once feared." Karaza took a step forward, her boots crunching softly against the earth. "And now they are nothing but dust," she replied, her voice low, almost bitter. "I am the last." "Not anymore," Gabriel said, his eyes steady. You're not alone. Not anymore. There was something in his words that struck her, something that resonated deep within her soul. She had never considered herself part of a larger group, a greater whole. She had always been the last, the survivor. But his words opened a door she had never thought to consider. Could she still belong? Could the Savorii, in some form, rise again? Gabriel's eyes softened as he approached her, extending his hand. We need your help, he said simply. The invasion isn't over. We're still fighting, and we need someone like you. Someone who knows what it means to survive. To fight. To win. Karaza's gaze remained fixed on his hand for a moment. The centuries of her people's pride and strength battling with the raw vulnerability of her current existence. She had never needed anyone before, never relied on another. But something in his offer stirred her, an old instinct, a need to protect, to fight for something greater than herself. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. The contact was brief, but in that moment, she knew this was her purpose. I will help you, Gabriel Blackwood, she said, her voice strong, filled with the certainty that had once defined the Savorii. And with that, the last Savorii and Earth's greatest champions stood together, ready to face whatever the future had in store. Gabriel Blackwood's grip was firm but not overbearing, his hand steady as if he had faced life-and-death situations countless times. The moment their hands touched, Karaza felt a subtle pulse of energy, not physical, but something more primal, a recognition of sorts, like two forces that had been destined to collide. Karaza withdrew her hand after a brief moment, and their eyes met once more. There was something in Gabriel's expression, respect, perhaps, but there was also something deeper. Curiosity. Not the curiosity of someone wondering what kind of war machine she was, but rather the curiosity of someone seeking a deeper understanding of who she was, of what she had become. Where do we go from here? Karaza asked, her voice low, filled with quiet determination. Gabriel studied her for a moment longer, as if assessing the true depth of her words, before answering. We fight, he said simply, his tone resolute. We fight together, not just for Earth, but for the survival of everything that's left. The enemy we face isn't just any alien force, it's something much worse. It's something that has the power to wipe out entire civilizations. You've seen it, I'm sure. Your people, your empire, were no exception. Karaza nodded, the memory of her fallen empire still fresh in her mind. The burning of Savorii cities, the screams of her people as they fell before the might of their enemies. She had survived because survival was what Savorii did best. But she had never expected to fight for something other than her own survival. Gabriel's words struck a chord within her, and despite the long, arduous years she had spent alone, drifting from system to system, there was a flicker of something within her, something like hope. The Savorii were a warrior race, born for battle, bred for war. And Karaza was no exception. Tell me about the enemy, Karaza urged, her eyes narrowing as she stood tall, her posture shifting, almost instinctively, into the warrior stance she had known for so long. Her body knew what it had to do. It had to fight. Gabriel glanced at her, seemingly impressed with how quickly she adjusted. He motioned to a nearby device, a holographic map of Earth and its surrounding space regions. This is the Nither, he began, his voice grave. A race of creatures. No, that's not the right word. They are more like a plague. They don't just conquer worlds. They consume them, wiping out every form of life and taking everything they need to survive. Entire civilizations fall before them like leaves in a storm. But unlike your people, the Savorii, they don't fight. They don't have an army. They just consume. Like locusts. He paused, watching her closely, as if gauging her reaction. Karaza's mind raced, processing the information. A race that didn't conquer, didn't fight, they simply took, wiped away entire species. It made her stomach turn. Her people had always fought for something, even in their darkest days. They had never simply given up. So, Earth is next on their list, Karaza said flatly, her voice cold. Gabriel gave a brief, humorless nod. Yes, and Earth is not prepared for them. We've fought wars, we've made allies across the galaxy, but this is something none of us were prepared for. We thought our enemies were the Federation, the invaders from neighboring systems. But this is something beyond that. We need every soldier we can get. Karaza's eyes burned with the heat of old memories of battles fought in the name of pride, in the name of survival. It didn't matter that she was the last Savorii. She had never needed an empire to define her. Her blood still ran with the legacy of warriors, and that legacy was far from forgotten. She was ready. "Then we fight," Karaza said, her voice firm now, the warrior's determination returning in full force. Gabriel's lips twitched into a semblance of a smile, though it was fleeting. "We fight. But we need you, Karaza. More than just your strength. We need your knowledge of tactics, of strategy. Your people were the greatest military force in the galaxy." "I know," Karaza responded, her gaze now shifting back to the stars above. "And I intend to show you why." Chapter 3, The First Battle. The days following Karaza's arrival on Earth were a blur of preparation and training. Gabriel and his team had already begun organizing the defense of the planet, but now they had a new ally, one who brought with her the ancient knowledge of the Savorii. In the war rooms, where once only human strategies had been discussed, Karaza now stood at the head of the table, offering her insight with a cool, measured intensity that both startled and inspired the human commanders. Karaza knew war. She knew the heat of battle, the sharp edge of a blade, the power of a fleet of warships engaging in a coordinated strike. But there was something about Earth that was different. The people here fought with an intensity that seemed to be born from something other than strategy. It was desperation, and in desperation, Karaza could see the potential for victory. On the front lines, she found herself working alongside Gabriel and his elite squadron, preparing to engage the Nither in their first major skirmish. Karaza had seen their ships in the distance, dark, sleek vessels that glided through space with a disturbing ease. There was no mistaking them for anything other than an invading force, and she had been in enough battles to know that the first strike would be the most crucial. "You have a chance to end this before it gets out of control," Karaza said to Gabriel, as they stood in the briefing room, looking at the holographic map of the incoming Nither fleet. Gabriel met her gaze with a steady look of determination. "I know, but they're not just a fleet. There's something worse. We've intercepted signals, and it looks like they've adapted faster than we predicted. We can't let them reach the planet." Karaza studied the map for a moment, calculating the enemy's movements. "Your people haven't encountered a force like this before. You're used to fighting armies, to using brute force and numbers. But these Nither, they don't fight like you do. They strike at the heart, destroy everything before you even know they're there. They're efficient, relentless." Gabriel nodded. "We know, but we've made alliances. We've brought in as much help as we can, and Earth's military is stronger than it's ever been." "You'll need more than just military strength to win this war," Karaza said, her voice cold and calculating. "You'll need a strategy to cripple their fleet before they can reach your core systems." "What do you suggest?" Gabriel asked, his voice tinged with hope. Karaza turned, her eyes narrowing as she mapped out her plan. She had led the Savorii to countless victories before against species far superior to anything Earth had ever faced. It wouldn't be easy, but she was confident. The Nither were ruthless, but they weren't invincible. "I'll need to take the lead on this," Karaza said. "I know their tactics. They think in terms of consumption. They'll destroy your first line of defense, but they won't anticipate the kind of counterstrike I can deliver. You'll have the full support of Earth's forces," Gabriel assured her, his tone resolute. "Just tell me what you need, and we'll make it happen." Karaza looked at him, her mind already racing through the possibilities. She wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. This was more than that. This was for survival, for the chance to reclaim what had been lost. For the Savorii. "I'll take the front," Karaza said, her voice carrying the weight of a leader. "And we'll make them regret underestimating us." Karaza stood at the helm of the newly formed coalition fleet, the deep hum of the engines beneath her feet vibrating through the command deck. Gabriel's fleet, along with those of their allies, had gathered for the final confrontation with the Nither. Their ships, a patchwork of Earth's technology and hastily acquired intergalactic vessels, stretched out in front of her like a jagged line of defense, sharp and unyielding. The space around them was still, but Karaza knew it wouldn't remain that way for long. She could feel it. This was their moment. Everything depended on the strategy she had laid out, on the confidence she had instilled in Gabriel's forces, and on her ability to strike first. The Nither were close. Their ships had entered the outer rim of Earth's defense zone, and Karaza could already see the faint silhouette of their massive, dark vessels on the edge of her ship's sensors. The Nither fleet was unlike any she had encountered before, sleek, almost organic in its design, and impossibly efficient in their approach. They didn't waste resources, didn't linger, and didn't care about the lives they took in their wake. Their purpose was singular: consume. They moved through space like a shadow, slipping through every defense with an unnerving ease. Karaza's Savorii instincts, honed over a lifetime of war, told her that Earth's forces couldn't hold them back using traditional tactics. The Nither didn't play by the same rules. She surveyed the battlefield, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the console in front of her. Gabriel had placed his trust in her, and now she had to deliver. The Nither would engage first, as they always did. The question was, would Earth be able to hold their ground long enough for her counterattack to succeed? Deploying the shields now. Gabriel's voice crackled over the comms. Karaza turned to see him standing at the edge of the command deck, watching her. His calm demeanor had always been a source of reassurance, but today, there was an edge to his focus that matched her own. "Let's do this," Karaza muttered under her breath. The Nither fleet surged forward, their ships weaving like serpents through the void, moving with a terrifying speed. They had launched an initial strike to probe Earth's defenses, testing for weaknesses. And as predicted, they were going straight for the heart of the fleet, aiming to neutralize the most important ships first. Earth's forces moved to intercept, but Karaza could already see that their reaction was too slow. The Nither were relentless, striking with precision, taking down Earth's outer defense lines in moments. But Karaza wasn't worried. This was only the first move. The real battle hadn't even begun. With a deep breath, Karaza activated her plan, the one she had meticulously crafted over the past few days. She had studied the Nither's patterns, their instincts, and their tactics. The first step was always to lure them in, to make them believe they had Earth on the ropes. The second step, Karaza's step, was to hit them where it hurt. "Deploy the phase warp drones," she commanded, her voice steady, her gaze locked on the massive Nither ships. "Set the coordinates for the heart of their formation." Gabriel's brow furrowed, but he gave a quick nod. The phase warp drones were a Savorii invention, an advanced form of weaponry that utilized distortions in space-time to create temporary rifts. When launched in the right moment, they could destabilize entire formations, causing the enemy ships to be scattered across vast distances. It was risky, but it was their only hope. As the drones activated, Karaza felt the pulse of the space around her shift. The air in the command room seemed to vibrate as the space around the Nither fleet began to warp and distort. Time itself seemed to twist, and then, a massive rupture exploded in the middle of the Nither formation. The enemy fleet, which had seemed so unstoppable just moments ago, was suddenly thrown into disarray. Ships veered off course, losing their cohesion as they scattered through the rift. Karaza didn't wait to see the outcome. She knew the drones had done their job. "Now," she shouted, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Gabriel immediately gave the command to fire. Earth's fleet surged forward, their weapons firing in a coordinated barrage, striking at the Nither ships with precision. The force of the combined firepower hit the disoriented enemy vessels like a hammer, breaking their fragile formation. The Nither, despite their efficiency, were not invincible. Not anymore. Karaza watched the chaos unfold on the battlefield, her heart pounding in her chest. She had given the signal, but now it was Gabriel's fleet that had to capitalize on the moment. The next few minutes were critical. If they failed to press the advantage, the Nither would recover and strike back with brutal force. "I have their command ship in my sights," Gabriel said over the comms, his voice steady. "Should we go for the kill?" Karaza paused, considering the question. The Nither command ship was massive, a dark fortress in the middle of their fleet. It was heavily shielded, heavily armed. But if they could take it down, the rest of the fleet would fall. The problem was that the risk of attacking it directly was high. "Do it," she replied, her voice resolute. "We finish this now." Chapter 4, The Last Strike. The battle had raged on for hours, the vastness of space filled with the sounds of explosions, of laser fire cutting through the dark expanse, and the cold hum of engines pushing the fleet forward. Karaza's eyes were fixed on the tactical screen, watching as the Nither fleet began to falter under the pressure of Earth's relentless assault. Gabriel's squadron had moved in close to the Nither command ship, weaving through debris and fire. It was a dangerous move, one that required every bit of precision and skill the humans had, but Karaza had no doubt they would succeed. Gabriel was Earth's champion, after all, and Earth's champions were not easily defeated. The command ship was slowly falling, the shields flickering as it tried to regroup, to make one last push against the combined forces of Earth and the remnants of the Savorii technology Karaza had shared. But it wasn't enough. The Nither, for all their efficiency, couldn't withstand the might of two species working together. Karaza's eyes narrowed as she watched their shields collapse, and with a single, precise command, she ordered the final strike. "Deploy the final wave," Karaza said, her voice cold with determination. The final wave was a combination of human firepower and Savorii precision, a synchronized strike that would break through the last of the Nither defenses. The final barrage hit. Explosions rocked the Nither command ship, sending shockwaves throughout their remaining fleet. It was over. The enemy had been defeated. Karaza stood in silence, watching the destruction unfold. The Nither had been vanquished, their fleet shattered. But as the last of their ships burned in the cold void of space, Karaza knew that this victory was not just hers or Gabriel's. It was a victory for all those who had been lost, for the Savorii, for Earth, and for every species that had fought to survive in the wake of galactic devastation. Gabriel came up beside her, his face lit by the glow of the tactical display, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "We did it," he said softly. Karaza turned to him, her eyes hardening with something unspoken. "We did," she replied. "But this is only the beginning. There are more enemies out there, and I will stand with you, Earth's champion, to face them." Gabriel smiled, but it was a smile that was tempered by the weight of what they had accomplished and what still lay ahead. "For Earth and for the Savorii," he said. "For all those who still fight," she agreed, her voice filled with a quiet determination. And together, they stood, knowing that the galaxy, though scarred, was still worth fighting for. The battlefield was quiet now, the remnants of the Nither fleet floating like shattered relics in the cold vacuum of space. Their once pristine ships were now mangled husks, some still drifting aimlessly, others completely disintegrated. The Earth fleet, battered but victorious, moved to secure the area, sweeping through the debris field, ensuring that no trace of the enemy remained. Karaza stood at the observation deck of the Varnies, her eyes scanning the aftermath of the battle. The silence that had followed the destruction was almost eerie, a stark contrast to the chaos of just hours before. She had seen so much death, so many battles, that the aftermath had long ceased to be something she feared. It was the cost of victory. Gabriel approached her, his footsteps echoing softly in the vast, empty space of the ship's command center. The tension in the air had finally started to dissipate, but there was a stillness between them, a weight of unspoken words. "We did it," Gabriel said again, though this time, his voice lacked the excitement of earlier. There was no gloating, no celebration, just a quiet recognition of the enormity of what they had accomplished. Karaza turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, but this war is not over. The Nither were only one threat in the galaxy. The peace we've fought for, this fleeting peace, is fragile. There are other enemies out there, and we will have to fight again." Gabriel nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He was a soldier at heart, one who knew that a single victory did not guarantee a lasting peace. But there was something in Karaza's tone, something in the way she spoke that stirred a memory of old lessons, the Savorei's warrior's creed. "Then we'll fight," he said, his voice firm, as if the idea of fighting for a cause was second nature to him. "We'll fight, just as we did today." Karaza's lips quirked into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're beginning to understand." Gabriel stood beside her, looking out at the quiet remains of the Nither fleet. The stars outside seemed peaceful now, distant and untroubled by the conflict that had just unfolded in their shadows. But that peace, Karaza knew, was an illusion. And now, she had a purpose again, not just as the last Savorii, but as part of something larger, a team, a partnership. "Gabriel, there's still so much to rebuild," she said, her voice softer now. "Not just the physical structures, but the belief that something greater can come out of this. Earth is strong, yes, but the galaxy is full of shadows, races, empires, and forces that we cannot even comprehend. What we've done today will be remembered, but there's more to do. Gabriel glanced at her, sensing the underlying meaning in her words. He didn't doubt her. After all, she had been right in every step of the battle. Her knowledge, her tactics, her ability to read the enemy had been the key to their victory. She had been a warrior, a survivor, and though she had lived through the fall of her own species, she had refused to let that loss define her. "And we'll do it together," he said, his words resolute. "You're not alone, Karaza. You've proven that you can be part of Earth's future. And Earth is ready to stand with you." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The galaxy had turned its back on her species, but in Gabriel's words, in the partnership they had formed, Karaza found something she thought she had lost: belonging. Not as a conqueror, not as the last of her people, but as a member of something greater. For the first time in a long while, Karaza allowed herself to hope, not just for Earth, but for herself, for her species' legacy. Perhaps the Savoriai's end had been tragic, but there was more to her story. There was more to her fight. Epilogue: The legacy of the Savoriai. Months had passed since the Nithar were defeated, but the galaxy still simmered with unrest. Gabriel and Karaza had formed an unlikely bond, one that stretched beyond the battlefield. Together, they worked to bring unity to the fragmented worlds, working tirelessly with Earth's allies to build a coalition of strength. Though the Nithar threat had been eliminated, new challenges loomed on the horizon. A galaxy that had long known war, domination, and survival had begun to change, and Karaza knew that this was just the beginning. The Savoriai had once ruled the stars, but now, they would be remembered differently, not for their conquests, but for their resilience, their ability to adapt, and their willingness to fight for something greater than themselves. Karaza had found her place in a new world, not as the last of her kind, but as an ally, a partner, and a champion in her own right. Her people had been forgotten by many, but they had not been lost. Their legacy would endure, not in their bloodlines, but in the lessons they had taught of strength, honor, and survival. And with Gabriel by her side, Karaza knew that she had found her place, not just among the stars, but in the hearts of those who were willing to fight for a better future. As the stars stretched out before her, Karaza allowed herself to believe in something she had long since given up on: hope. For the first time in years, it wasn't a distant dream. It was something real, something they could build together,